Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Wednesday, July 5th, 2017. Happy day after Independence Day. We're back to being dependent, I guess. Back to Britain with you, I say. Stop laying around all weekend. It was a fantastic 4-day weekend here for us at the Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, minus the fact that, of course, we broadcast during both of Monday and Tuesday of our 4-day weekend. But it felt like a weekend. It felt like a very long weekend. It felt like there was an extra day in there because I had to get up so early in the morning to ship my son out for his big Boy Scout adventure. But we're back on our regular schedule. It's Wednesday. We expect to hear from, as usual, Joan McCarter later on in the program and Greg Dworkin this morning to round up the news and headlines of the day. Oh, well, I have some flying friends that decided to join us and probably, I would guess, drink some of my blood in a parasitic manner during the show. That'll be fun. You might hear me slapping and swinging, and there we go. Oh, do we get him? No. Lots of clap. Well, please applaud. Please clap. Ladies and gentlemen, when you do clap, make sure you see if you can get that mosquito in your grasp when you do it. All right. So, what's up this morning? Oh, I don't know. The president is tweeting again this morning. He's a little bit upset that China has not agreed to work with us in economic harmony and work out a better trade agreement of some kind. I don't know what he was after, but he has no goals anyway. And who would have guessed that communist China wouldn't agree to work with us on the world economic stage and rewrite our trade agreements to our advantage and their own disadvantage? I don't know. They also apparently failed to stop the North Koreans, or Norks, as he used to call them. The president used to tweet about that, and it's actually kind of a catchy little nickname for them. I'm sure they're not happy about it. But anyway, yes, what's got him upset this morning is, of course, the trade agreements. Yesterday, he was out at the Virginia golf course again. I understand this is his 36th trip to his golf courses. Just by way of pointing out that 20% of the days that he's been in office, he's been at the golf course, but never mind that. There's almost no chance you're going to convince anybody at this point that he's simply a ridiculous hypocrite and one of the laziest presidents in the world. I mean, we already are convinced. You're not going to convince any of his supporters. That much we know. All right, let's see. What other fun things have we got? Oh, look, I think I did get that mosquito. Fantastic. Breaking news update. Senseless mosquito killing, but I was standing my ground, and it's not Florida, but I think most probably almost any jury in this Commonwealth, almost said state, but we're in Virginia here, would probably uphold my right to do that. I don't know, maybe in the future that liberals want, we almost certainly will be put on trial for animal cruelty. But he was trying to get me first. I was simply standing my ground. I need my blood. I'm going to retweet for you, those of you who are listening live. I just saw a fun Jersey Shore is the best tweet, and I think it's true. Somebody put together a fantastic sand sculpture of what appears to be a stylized, it's the wrong color shirt, for one thing, stylized sand sculpture of Governor Chris Christie lounging on the Island Beach State Park, which he had, of course, closed during the July 4th weekend to everyone but himself. I think that's probably the best formulation of that of that reality. I've seen lots of interesting discussion about it and different ways of putting the story. Did that not go out? I gotta make sure that goes and clicks and goes already. And then I gotta answer the phone on Greg Dworkin and get ourselves organized here. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, good morning.
Did you get to go to the beach anywhere? I don't know where the beach got.
No.
No? Okay. Were they all closed, or is just not on your agenda?
I don't know. Not on my agenda. It was a day off. It was a day to lounge around the house and,
Yes.
barbecue a little bit and get chores done and stuff. I worked Monday, so I didn't have a 4-day weekend the way some people did.
Oh, wow.
But actually, you worried me a little bit in the intro to the show because you wanted everybody to clap. If I remember my Peter Pan, that just brings them back to life, so you really don't want to do that.
Dang. Let me look and see if I can find him.
Yeah, well, he'll find you. Don't worry.
Yeah, well, somebody else will. He brought friends, I'm sure.
Oh, that's good. So it's a 4th of July party, or as they say on Twitter, Brexit 1776.
All right. Well, I think we should think about rejoining just temporarily until we can. I don't know. Until we know what's going on.
I don't know who gets the better or the worse deal if that's the case. So,
that's true. We do.
I have the pundit roundup for this morning. It's going to be a very brief stint on the show today, just because of the holiday yesterday and the semi-holiday on Monday. Not a tremendous amount is going on, but both domestically and in foreign matters, there are things that are worth mentioning. Which one do you want to do first? Door number 1 or door number 2?
Well, if it's just doors, 1.
1. Okay, so let's do domestic. So we have a situation where Republicans have this horrible bill pending in the Senate, and Mitch McConnell, the genius,
that guy,
who is both a tactician and strategist, was supposed to get it all done last week and didn't and couldn't. So now what happens is all of the Republican senators go home and they have to meet their constituents.
Well,
so how do they do that? So they hide.
Yeah.
Some of them just don't go to the July 4th parade. Some of them that do manage to find the most remote island within their states that has the least amount of population, hoping to be shielded from this. But of course, not everybody is feeling that. There's both a story in the Washington Post and the New York Times.
Yes.
And by the way, there is a New York Post and Washington Times, so don't confuse them.
Oh, all right.
So let's look at the New York Times story. Senate Republicans lay low on the 4th or face single-minded pressure. In normal times, the 4th of July parade is a fat pitch down the middle for the grinning politician. For instance, here was Senator Joe Manchin III, or as they like to call him on Twitter, Three Sticks, a Democrat facing re-election next year in a state that President Trump won by 42 points, waving unheckled among the firefighters, beauty queens, and county commissioners who streamed up Maple Avenue. Political disputes have never impinged on the festivities here, said Karen Lobbin, 70, who's been involved with Alderson's parade in one way or another for all of its 56 years. That's in West Virginia. But she says things are different now. Mr. Manchin's Republican colleague in West Virginia, Senator Shelley Moore Capito, was not here on Tuesday.
No?
As she had been 2 years earlier, she released a YouTube message but had no public events for the day. She's one of the swing votes, of course. Republican Senator next door in Ohio, Rob Portman, had none, nor did the 2 Republican senators in Iowa. The parades in Colorado proceeded without Cory Gardner. Tough summer for Senate Republicans who are trying to combine long-promised repeal of the Affordable Care Act with a replacement that has, in legislation drafted so far, been as popular as sunburn.
Hey.
I don't think sunburn's all that popular, so it gives you an idea what's going on here.
Yeah, I think it's low.
But somewhere out there, Senator Susan Collins of Maine says, never before in the 15 times I've marched in this parade have I had people so focused on a single issue. I think it's because healthcare is so personal.
Well, yes, it is personal.
Right?
Lots of people use it.
Yeah, other Republicans will soon be out and about, and some have already been. Bill Cassidy from Louisiana was met with chants of vote no in a Baton Rouge church on Friday. And Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas will hold 3 town hall-style meetings this week in the western part of the state. Chuck Grassley has scheduled 9 as part of his annual tour of the state's 99 counties. Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania is holding a televised meeting, albeit with an invitation-only audience. He's only going to meet with people who can't speak. While the receptions they receive may vary, judging by those in the streets on Tuesday, the primary subject will not. Healthcare, 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 they yelled at Mrs. Collins. And Susan Collins was thanked by everybody. It was amazing. And that is pretty clear in the Washington Post version of parades and protest. GOP lawmakers get earful about health care. But thank you, Susan. People are thanking me over and over again. Thank you, Susan. Stay strong, Susan. This is Susan Collins saying in an interview after the parade.
I wonder if she was deeply troubled by that.
Well, see, the thing is, it's I get that nobody trusts the Republican moderates.
Right.
Who aren't really moderates. That's part of the reason why nobody trusts them.
Yes.
But, Josh Marshall has this theory that moderates always cave. However, in this particular case, you have both public pressure and public comments really boxing in Murkowski, who's probably the most independent of the Republicans, merely because she's already been primaried and won. Heller in Nevada, whose governor is adamantly opposed to the Republican bill, and Collins have all boxed themselves in with public statements. So it's really hard to see how they're going to turn around and in the end vote for this bill like they usually do and cave like they usually do. It's just hard to see.
They have tricks. And some of them work better than others. And I mean, all we can do is explain the standard tricks in anticipation of their possibly doing that. And
but everybody's looking. Usually those tricks are like when people are only like half looking.
True. This is a bigger audience. And so some of the standards may not work, although they'll certainly try them, and they may work for some people.
They would prefer to be able to make up their mind without everybody staring at them, but no way.
No.
And the fact that it's already been longer than people think. That is to say, nothing happened last week with the brilliant Mitch McConnell. Makes it difficult. Now, we get that under the radar when nobody's looking, and that's what all of this week is about, McConnell is wheeling and dealing, and he's doing his polar payouts and his, the Buffalo payback, whatever it was called, that they did in the House to get the Buffalo Republican
I don't know
House
what
person.
They came up with for that one.
I forgot what that one was, but basically
the Buffalo
bribes.
bribery. They should just call it
it's public bribery.
Sure.
Yeah. But this is what Murkowski heard at her 4th of July parade on a remote island. In Maine and Alaska, where Republican senators came out loud and early against the bill, residents applauded their lawmakers. Murkowski, who's criticized Better Care Reconciliation Act for defunding Planned Parenthood and cutting Medicaid, was deluged by healthcare questions as she walked a parade in the small town of Wrangell, Alaska. Garbage, 63. That's garbage. Garbisch, not garbage. Thanked her for being the voice of reason and slowing down the bill. Murkowski was hearing that particular sort of praise again and again. She moved comfortably through a crowd gathered to watch children street race and lumberjacks saw logs. I love watching lumberjacks up in Maine. We do that every summer.
Yeah.
Most people don't ask for or against. They just say, make sure you're taking care of our interests and fairness for those that do the for or against. Everybody's pretty much saying they don't think this is good for us, says Murkowski. I mean, this is the kind of feedback they're getting. So again, very difficult to see how they turn around and say, oh, well, I don't really care about all this adulation. I'm just going to do the opposite.
Well, it's difficult to anticipate. When it happens, you'll know. When
it happens, you'll know. But it'll be news.
Yes. Well, we'll wait and see. I have no doubt that these. The two featured in the article will probably be able to stand.
Right, and if Heller does as well, and he's got his own issues, including re-election in a Clinton state, that's your three. The rest don't matter.
Yes. Right. Huh? True enough. So we hopefully they don't go in for any of the craziness like, well, I changed a comma.
But remember, it's not going to fail with a vote of 49. Mm-hmm. Those three don't do it. All of a sudden, Rand Paul and all the conservatives will find reasons to not like the bill.
Yes. Well,
right. So it'll fail by 7 because all of a sudden, it's unacceptable.
Right. Well,
had they folded, the conservatives would have said, but, there's a comma. They're the guys that do all the tricks that you're talking about that change their mind.
Yes, they'll be the ones that are likely. Well, they're the ones who are at stake in the stories you might be reading this morning about new plans and new approaches and changes that they're going to make to the bill that are going to bring people back into the fold. The question is, will those other three go along?
Meanwhile, the Republicans are trying to play the refs. They have sent to the CBO apparently 2 separate bills.
Yes.
One with and one without a Ted Cruz amendment allowing insurers to both offer non-compliant and compliant, according to the Affordable Care Act, insurance policies.
Right.
Because Ted Cruz asked for it.
Right.
And then, having sent that, the Republicans started complaining that they're using March 2016 standards instead of more recent ones. I think we talked about that a little bit on the show on Monday. But we got some feedback from some experts who said, look, the CBO simply can't change the modeling that quickly. It's impossible. It takes weeks.
Yes.
And so the idea that they're going to put pressure on the CBO and the CBO is suddenly going to use the new modeling that Republicans want is crazy in the first place, because technically it can't happen. But secondly, why would they want it? Because if they claim to save money, it can only be by covering less people. Or if they cover less people, then it will save them money. But the objection to the bill from the moderates is that it covers less people. The objection from the conservatives isn't that it costs too much. I mean, it's a generic, but that's not what they're complaining about in this particular bill.
Yeah.
So if they satisfy the conservatives by saving more money, it can only mean that they're covering less people, which only makes the moderates even more adamant about we don't want this bill. So I don't understand why they would even want the 2017 standard to be used instead of the 2016. It's actually worse for them if they're trying to pass the bill.
I don't know that they do. My guess is that they sort of view it as a win-win. They know they will not get this demand, but they know that the demand is confusing enough. The explanation for why the demand is stupid is so confusing that people will tune out, and it will leave them standing there with at least with the ability to say, hey, this terrible CBO score is really, it's the CBO cheating in favor of liberals. We told them it needed to be changed in order to be realistic.
And they refused.
Listen. They refused.
We told them 5 minutes before they released their report, and they still refused.
Yeah. And, but I could have done it, or Ted Cruz could have told them how to model it, or they could have just put a great score on it
or they could have crossed it out in crayon and just written something in. The funny thing is that as much as they complain about the CBO score, they actually haven't come out with something of their own. They didn't say, according to our model, it's not this.
True. They just know that the CBOs are, I don't know what the score is, but I know that's what it isn't.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And so how do we know? Well, we just do.
Yeah. Well, we're good for business, and that means
it's not persuasive,
something.
and it's not persuading the moderates who are using the CBO score as a reason to vote no.
Yeah, I guess that's problematic.
If everybody ignores the CBO, I suppose you can too. But the fact is that the moderates are using the CBO score to say this is why I am voting no. So you cannot just write over it in crayon and say it's something different.
Mm-hmm. Armando is asking in the background whether he says both the Cruz model and the repeal standalone idea seem to me not to comply with the Byrd rule, and asking, well, what am I missing? You may not be missing anything. I haven't heard I haven't seen any written discussion, reported discussion about whether or not it complies with the Byrd rule. I don't think they're quite at
everything
that
I
stage yet,
saw says it won't, but they have to get that far first, right?
Yeah.
So the CBO bill comes first, and that's, I think, why they're not talking about it. However, this is something procedurally you can help us clear up. I've had questions from people who say, you mentioned the Byrd rule a lot, and you mentioned reconciliation a lot. They're not the same thing.
Right.
The Byrd rule has specific things that basically say it has to be budget and you can't stick in policy. The reconciliation thing is based on a rule they passed that allows them to do this one time for one bill. And if they do, for example, repeal, then they can't do replace because they had their one slot taken. Can you explain that part?
That's, I think, erroneous. For somewhere, I discussed this a couple of days ago, that somewhere along the line, I think
I asked you the same question, but I keep getting these questions sent to me.
The reporting on reconciliation, reporting on procedure is always bad, generally speaking. It's difficult. It's the kind of thing that I think...
It's easy. You just write technical reasons, but we like to explain it.
Right. Well, they either do that, or if they try to explain it, I don't know. I don't know whether the writers are disinterested or just don't get it, or the editors think people don't want to hear about it. And they tend to cut corners. Yeah. And I don't blame them. And, keep it in niche reporting as far as I'm concerned.
But that's us, and that's why I'm asking.
But yeah, I for a number of reasons, I don't see any reason why, or I don't know where the idea came from that reconciliation was something that could only be done once in a year. It is typically done only once in a year. They usually don't need to resort to it more often than that. I think it's part confusion, part belief in magic, part dependence on tradition, and people have put together the idea that, well, the filibuster is so weird and confusing and anti-democratic and frustrating, and the existence of reconciliation with its opportunity to bypass it for something important that they tend to only do once a year and no more, has sort of given way to this belief that reconciliation was or maybe that when they came up with the filibuster rule, they said, well, this is a little bit crazy, so we'll grant a magic rule that says once a year, on one day of the year, any crime is allowed. Some kind of crazy science fiction answer. It has nothing to do with one time. It has to do with the instructions being included in the budget resolution, which is a once-a-year exercise, but you can put instructions in a budget resolution that says, I want 4 reconciliation bills from you guys.
But is it fair to say that I get it right, not being a lawyer, that the Byrd rule is codified into law, but reconciliation is based on whatever the House passes as a rule each year?
No. They are both codified.
Okay.
The procedure is, and they're both procedural rules. The only difference, I guess, the basic difference between reconciliation and the Byrd rule and the way they work together is reconciliation is the process by which a bill can move through the House and Senate with expedited procedures, including protection from filibuster. The Byrd rule governs what sort of legislative issues can be addressed
Senate
in
only.
that protected bill. Senate only, yes, because, technically it applies to the House too, but the House can waive any of its rules by majority vote at any time.
But what I'm getting at is there something in this year's budget rule that the House passed that makes reconciliation a one-time thing? Which is different than the Byrd rule and different than the whole concept of what reconciliation
makes reconciliation a one-time thing. There's a number of, I think, like I said, erroneous beliefs about it. It's that the only one-time thing that is clear about anything, and I guess that's not even clear. I suppose you could just try to pass another budget. There's nothing that says you can't do that. But the only thing that makes it one time is that the instructions that give you the authority to even try to use reconciliation have to be written into the budget resolution and passed by both houses, and that's an event that takes place once a year. That's it. That's the only one-time thing there is about it. There's other technical questions. Things have come up before. For instance, if a budget resolution gives you instructions that say we want to have a reconciliation bill that saves $1 billion, and then, of course, then the rules require that you save at least $1 billion or more in your reconciliation bill to initially qualify for the expedited procedure. But what happens if you write a bill that, or say you what about if the same committee reports out 2 separate bills that together add up to $1 billion, but they are to be passed separately, both under reconciliation procedures? Would that be allowable? And I don't think it's been done very often, but there's really nothing in the rules that says you can't do that.
Right.
So then you would have it done twice in a year, and it's been done twice.
So it's not the rules that are preventing repeal and then replace. It's the fact that repeal and then repeal doesn't have the votes.
Well,
that's why it hasn't happened. When they tried to do this by at least discussing it in the very beginning of Trump's term, Trump said no. Apparently McConnell was considering it. And then Trump turned around and said yes when McConnell was not considering it. And all the voices from the Republican group who are trying to work on this say it's got 15 to 20 votes. That's why we're not doing it.
Oh, repeal only.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly doesn't have...
It's not a rule. It's that they don't have the votes.
Yeah. Well, there's that. And then, but there is also the rule. There's also the question of, is a straight repeal only of Obamacare allowable on, here's what the Byrd rule. The Byrd rule tells you whether or not something is eligible for reconciliation procedures. It can't be policy oriented in nature. It has to be about finding places to cut the budget and lower the deficit, essentially. That's the fiscal part of the numbers part of the Byrd rule with which we're most often concerned. The thing that trips up most content, to use the internet term, that the people have proposed putting in a reconciliation bill for protection from the filibuster. Most of the things that have been disallowed are because they don't have a direct budgetary impact. And that's the problem. Although it certainly has a budgetary impact to repeal Obamacare, it has to be the chief aim of the legislation. And that's a judgment call. very often, but the basis that the parliamentarian usually uses is it can't be an incidental, we always wanted to do XYZ policy, but we couldn't get it passed because of the filibuster, so we'll use reconciliation to do it. And by the way, if we do it, as it happens, it will save $1 billion. But this is meant to be a bookkeeping job, reconciliation. Reconciliation gets protection because it's about technocratic green eye shade stuff. And you have to surgically be removing dollars from planned expenditures going forward. Not, I want to repeal the army, and that costs money, so reconciliation it. It's not magical protection for whatever you want to do. There's a very specific purpose for reconciliation. It was, when we say that it's statutorily established, the statute is the Budget Act.
Yeah.
So that should give you some clue, right? So, if you say, well, I want to be able to execute people with wood chippers in this country, we want to be able to do that.
It'll save money.
Save money, right? So that's not enough. That's not the point.
It won't save money?
If you want to do, I don't know. It depends on the cleanup, I guess.
I don't have to, pay Medicaid for these people.
Right, that's true. But
eventually I won't have to pay Medicare either.
You could try to argue that, but again, that's sort of incidental. The rule was written by Robert Byrd, whom you couldn't pull the wool over his eyes most of the time.
Because he wasn't born yesterday.
Right. He was, no kidding. I think I was born a long time ago. So long ago he's dead now, as a matter of fact. But yeah, the point was it was pretty reasonably well crafted to allow the parliamentarian to say, I think everybody knows that you weren't primarily aiming at the budget with this. If you have a policy that you want to bring, but you're sad because of the filibuster, change the filibuster rules. Don't come to me with this nonsense.
Right. And again, to step back, the whole reason we're going over this in detail is because it looks like McConnell doesn't have the vote, so we're trying to figure out what parliamentary tricks he's going to try in order to get those votes, some of which really aren't allowed. And when we say aren't allowed, we mean they run afoul of the Byrd rule. Sure, they can change the rules, but, you can't go too far in terms of figuring out what happens at that point. Let's just look at what the rules are right now and try to figure out what works and what doesn't. And that's why we're in the situation we're in. It doesn't look like, from reviewing the experience of the Republican senators when they went back home, that it's getting any easier for them. There's no momentum to get this done. In fact, if anything, the opposite. Which is what they said before they left. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens when they get back. And plus, we'll see whatever CBO actually does come up with.
Okay. By the way, Joan has sent a note that says she can't join us at this point, but just saying what might be shaping the thinking about the one rule is that I guess, and I don't know, I've reviewed the language, and this one doesn't jump out at me as having been part of it, but I guess the instructions in the budget resolution this year allowed for just one healthcare bill under reconciliation this time around. And I guess you could write a limit in there, but if it's not written in there, there's no reason why otherwise you couldn't use more than one vehicle under reconciliation rules. But I'll take a look. I'll see what the language says. I don't recall that being the case, but it certainly could be. Okay.
So that's the domestic thing for today. On the international front, of course, we had that North Korean missile.
Yes.
It's apparently a formal ICBM because it seems to have the range to reach Alaska, which will get Murkowski's attention.
Yes.
And at the same time, we have Trump on his way to the G20 meeting in Hamburg, Germany for Friday. And we have this interesting article here, the Daily 202, that of course is the area code for Washington, D.C., that I learned just last week.
Oh.
Missile test underscores the failure of Trump's naive approach to North Korea. He has done the tweets that you mentioned at the beginning of the show. He hasn't gotten what he wanted from China in terms of trade. He hasn't gotten what he wanted from China in terms of working with North Korea. The fact of the matter is,
he has done the tweets.
His naive approach to foreign policy hasn't worked anywhere, and everybody hates him.
Uh-oh.
So it's an interesting concept in terms of we'll make America great again. You're going to get tired of winning. But the guy really doesn't know what he's talking about. And part of the problem that we who didn't vote for him got so upset with is the concept that a incompetent nincompoop would be in charge of foreign policy and would be commander-in-chief, and that he'd be more likely than less likely to accidentally get us into a war. Not that other people haven't. but that when you don't know what you're doing on the foreign stage, they're not as forgiving as Fox News. And you can't get away with not knowing what you're talking about. Here's an interesting piece from Dan Dresner, professor of international politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, a regular contributor to the Washington Post, who says, my so-called Secretary of State.
Oh.
I mean, is Tillerson really Secretary of State? Let's ask the deeper existential question. If this is what the State Department's own website thinks America's chief diplomat is supposed to do, chief foreign affairs advisor, then is Rex Tillerson actually Secretary of State? I have my doubts, he says. Not a minor issue. Right now, there's a mini crisis in the Persian Gulf, which, by the way, Trump helped cause. There's the larger crisis in North Korea. Trump didn't cause it. It predates him, but he didn't do anything to fix it. And so he's got all his problems on his plate here. And, of course, he's managed to alienate all of his allies. Here's a good piece from CNN at the very bottom of the list I sent you. Trump's long list of disagreements with G20 nations on climate change, trade, NATO, immigration, North Korea, Syria, just to name a few. You have Rex Tillerson making noise about, we'll just let Putin decide Assad's fate in Syria. Just said that a couple of days ago. And you scratch your head and say, they don't know anything. They really don't know anything, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah. I'm scared. I mean, yeah, I don't know how else to put it. But, it does, what can you do? It's not scaring his base. And, we're also somehow, we've become convinced that this guy is actually the president and is entitled to have named this other guy as Secretary of State. And I guess until we undo that, we're going to have to live with this. It's amazing.
Here's a piece from July 3rd by Paul Waldman who dives right into that. The title is The Problem with, but Trump's base loves it.
What problem exactly? I mean,
the way reporters do it. Trump tweets something despicable. Elected Republicans say, tisk, tisk.
Yes.
I don't approve of this.
Right.
It troubles me, whatever they say. White House spokespeople offer laughably pathetic defenses. Journalists and commentators point out that as vulgar and infantile as Trump is, his base loves it.
Yes.
And, of course, the last one they did was the CNN video about that.
Okay. Well, right? So is it the problem? Is he saying the problem is Trump's base loves it, or is he telling me the problem with saying the problem with saying
it is that Trump's base is such a small part of the American electorate. You are losing the fact that everybody else doesn't love it, and that still matters.
Okay.
When we say that Trump's base love this stuff, we should be clear about what we mean when we refer to his base. As Trump's pollster Tony Fabrizio says, they like him, they believe in him, they have not to any large degree been shaken from him. The more media attacks him, the more it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy on the side of the Trump supporters who fervently believe the media treat him unfairly. But that's only partially true. His approval ratings are in the 30s. NPR and PBS says Republicans are evenly split on whether Trump's use of Twitter is effective and informative or reckless and distracting. Fox News says 21% of Republicans approve of Trump's tweeting. 59% say he should be more cautious about it. 18% outright disapprove of it. So if we say that Trump's base likes what he does, we have to acknowledge it's the Trump's base we're referring to as a minority of Republicans. And that puts the question whether this is clever strategy in a very different light. In fact, he makes the case it's not clever at all. And, for example, he talks about what was going on in the White House with the Scarborough-Brzezinski nonsense, which I review and look at as, more pro wrestling, both sides trying to do this to get ratings.
I consider it a foundational document, but all right.
Okay. Well, there was a caveat there. Some White House advisors said they were frustrated that the Brzezinski feud overtook the president's fight with CNN, which seemed, in their eyes, to have clear villains and heroes. So soak that in for a moment, Paul Waldman says. They were worried that his feud with the host of Morning Joe might distract from his far more productive and important feud with CNN.
Yes.
We should remember that the next time anybody suggests the Trump White House is staffed by shrewd operators who know what they're doing.
Okay. I try not to think that.
But, more importantly, if you react to the latest vile Trump tweet with whatever you want to say about it, Trump's base love it, you're excusing his behavior and putting it in a value-free context where the only thing that matters is whether it works. It doesn't work, but even if it did, no good. And this is a distinction I always make, which, people yell at me for, but I'm right. And that is, there's a difference between a Trump voter, some of whom might be reluctant, and a Trump supporter who love this stuff. And the Trump supporter is the smaller group. It doesn't include all Republicans, and it doesn't even include all Trump voters, some of whom are sorry they did. And that's why his approval rating has dropped 10 points or so. So, there's some segment, some slice of that public, which is not the same thing as a Trump supporter, who's not going around supporting it. Those are the people who say, I wish you wouldn't tweet.
I guess so. I don't
know.
So
just keep that in mind when everybody tells you that his base is unshakable. His tiny base is unshakable.
Well, that's true. I did see somebody sharing something today. It was, they said, I keep coming back to this thing I read in Time magazine, which I guess was reporting on a I forget what the context is. I think we're reporting on a focus group about Trump supporters, but the woman who was quoted as saying, we know the unshakables, I guess. We know his goal is to make America great again, a woman said. It's on his hat. And
right.
It's just like somebody was bringing it up again. Like every time we're supposed to believe that these people are going to change their mind, it's like, well, I know it doesn't look like he's trying to make America great again by destroying health insurance.
I know he's not a liar because he told me.
It's on his hat. I mean, what else could it be? You know he's trying. I mean, not everybody.
The guy said he's right. What else do you want?
Right. Well, gee whiz, Phil. I asked the man if it was his. Yeah, I'll always go back to that old quote, which hardly anybody recognizes anymore. But yeah, that's the level you're dealing with, and it's great, thankfully, that we can be reminded every once in a while that, yes, only a small percentage of Americans are actually that horribly stupid that they can say, well, I mean, I don't care what you say. His hat says elsewhere.
Go ahead and shame them. Make fun of them. I don't really care. They're useless.
All right. Well, excellent.
It's everybody else. Right? And everybody else is not, is not them. Thank goodness.
Thankfully. Well, lots of people are upset about it, but not enough so far willing to say things like, maybe he's not the president of the United States. And
well, nobody's going to say that, but in terms of how upset they are, the generic Democratic lead for Congress is about 8 to 10 points now, which is pretty hefty. So we'll see how that goes. Finally, let me leave you with a more durable story.
I will not let you. All right. You can give me the story, though.
I'm going to do it anyway.
Don't leave.
Yeah. Ancient Romans made world's most durable concrete. We might use it to stop rising seas. It's an interesting piece here. Apparently, the material they used was made out of volcanic ash and quicklime. And it's harder and more durable than any of the concrete we have today.
Right.
It resists seawater. It's very, very good for making seawalls. And why we don't use it in our roads, I don't know.
In our roads?
Yeah. I mean, we got roads that have concrete bases that need to be replaced every 3 or 4 years. This stuff lasts 2,000 years.
Witness Pompeii.
A bunch of half-sunken structures off the Italian coast might sound less impressive than a gladiatorial coliseum, but underwater, the marvel is in the material. The harbor concrete, a mixture of volcanic ash and quicklime, has withstood the sea for 2 millennia and counting. What's more, it's stronger than when it was first mixed.
That's good.
And they talk about it. Just interesting stuff. Every once in a while, we should
That's in your list?
Talk about interesting stuff.
I think so.
It is in my list, yeah.
All right. I will read that. Yeah. I mean, off the air, I think. But
did you know that cheetahs are such genetically similar creatures that a skin graft from one always works on another? That's the kind of little factoid you should throw out there that people find interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
Who's grafting cheetah skin?
Well, don't try this at home.
This is the fastest surgeon in the world. Right. All right. Well,
science. I just think we should give you these occasional,
absolutely. This is,
factoids that make things interesting.
Right. Now, and if you're John McCain, you said, they're out there spending government money grafting cheetah skin. Outrageous.
Right.
Porculus, kill it, whatever. Well, it's good they know this. And the cheetahs are happy.
Well, just, it's one of those things.
They're a base. They're a tiny base, but they are a base to work with.
I'm going to actually, for Scott Anderson, whoever's doing it this week, here is a little article about cheetah genetic diversity, just because this show really should expand your horizons and do more than just talk about reconciliation.
Expanded the living crap out of my horizons. I'll tell you that. Wow.
Well, anyway, that's the summary for today. Little of this, little of that. But here we are back from the holidays and ready to see what the heck Mitch McConnell is coming up with. It doesn't sound like it's going to be popular, according to all the articles. It's less popular than sunburn, whatever that means. So we'll see where we go. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning on a variety of topics, some of which you didn't expect. And we'll be back. I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll talk again about news, because I'm sure stuff will happen now that it's not a holiday.
Right. You'll find out about the Jaguars and their melanoma problems.
Well, we'll deal with that on another day.
Interesting, to
All
say
right.
the least.
Take care.
Thank you. You too, the same. And, right, the cheetahs don't care about the things being less popular than sunburn because they could just switch skins. That's fantastic. I get the idea now. I understand why they were taking a look at that. It's not that they were trying to figure out whether they could swap faces on cheetahs and make a movie out of it. It's the genetic diversity thing. That the cheetahs are all so genetically similar. And I guess that, again, it's a community. It's just a small community. That skin grafts, I guess that's a good basis for testing, as opposed to, I guess, getting, you know how difficult if you think grafting skin on cheetahs is tough, try getting a swab for 23andMe at any cheetahs, any 2, 3, 4 cheetahs you meet. It's probably easier to actually graft the skin. So I guess that's supposed to be some sort of a baseline test, well known among the genetic scientist community, I'm sure. That skin grafting, is that the easiest thing to do or the toughest thing to do? Like, if you can graft skin from one X to another, then you know that is a genetically similar bunch. But, you know, the other tests, not so much. I don't know. That's surprising, to say the least. So we should spend the next hour on that. I'm sure Armando would be happy to do that, and Joan likely would be happy to learn something too. They're very intellectually curious people. All right. That wasn't where I intended to go, but that's what's great about the show. Another thing that's great about the show is we have lots of things to check in with in Pocket and elsewhere. And one of the things I found, I knew it was still in there somewhere in Pocket, was the text of the budget resolution, S-Con-Res 3, which somewhere in here, if I can open the thing up, will give us the reconciliation instructions so we can check it, you know, in real time here. Reconciliation in the Senate and in the House. I mean, obviously, both will get instructions. It's in Title 2 of S-Con-Res 3, the currently operative budget resolution. What was the question? Oh, it was about the number of times it could be used and whether there was instructions about being one bill. Let's see. In the Senate, that's usually where the rules are most relevant. One, there's instructions for the Committee on Finance to do some work. Committee on Finance shall report changes in laws within its jurisdiction to reduce the deficit by not less than, okay, how many zeros is this? $1 billion. Is that right? Yeah. $1 billion for the period of fiscal years 2017 through 2026. Easy enough to do. I mean, just the lowest possible bar. $1 billion over the next 10 years. The Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, likewise, shall report changes in laws within its jurisdiction to reduce the deficit by not less than $1 billion for the same period. C, Section C of, or subsection C of Section 2001 of the bill. In the Senate, not later than January 27, 2017. By the way, it's interesting to me that they always include a deadline like that in here, and they routinely miss that deadline. And this bill missed this deadline too, which means the deadline means nothing. That's always kind of been troublesome for me. In the Senate, not later than January 27, 2017, the committees named in subsections A and B, Finance and Help, shall submit their recommendations to the Committee on the Budget, Committee on the Budget of the Senate. That's typical. That's your basic standard operating procedure. The committees of jurisdiction on the policy stuff formulate the policy, and then they hand it over to budget, and budget merges the bills into one bill, but it never, well, okay. Committee, okay, so they're going to report to the Committee on the Budget. Upon receiving all such recommendations, the Committee on the Budget of the Senate shall report to the Senate a reconciliation bill, got that at least, carrying out all such recommendations without any substantive revision. And I guess that you could interpret as saying, well, it says a reconciliation bill. And I suppose that also leaves room for budget resolutions at other times in the future saying, well, you can report one or more reconciliation bills carrying out all such recommendations. And so long as the bills otherwise qualify for reconciliation treatment, there's nothing that I know of in the rules that would prevent them from doing it. I guess so long as, I suppose in this case you would say if you had given them the latitude to bring more than one reconciliation bill, you could, the minimum requirement would be a savings of $2 billion, you might guess. Finance has to be responsible for the reduction of the deficit by $1 billion over 10 years. And HELP has to likewise find $1 billion over 10 years. So at minimum, the reconciliation bill or bills should reduce the deficit by $2 billion. But it would be really, this is the part that puzzles me always. And you know what? I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head by what procedure the Senate and the parliamentarian and others get around the stated deadline. In the Senate, not later than January 27th, 2017, the committees named shall submit their recommendations. Neither one of the committees met that deadline. Obviously, think about it. January 27th, 2017. They were far, far from meeting that deadline. And I'm not certain. I looked into it at one point and I never really found a satisfactory answer. But at some point, it becomes obvious that everybody looks the other way for whatever reason. It may be that it's within the jurisdiction under the rules and precedents for the chairs of the directed committees to waive the deadline or to, by majority vote, the committee charged can extend the deadline. Or maybe by majority vote, the budget committee to whom you're reporting can extend the deadline. Although it seems to me like it should be a full vote of the Senate. And again, it may end up being the case that it's a full vote of the Senate and they do by majority vote extend the deadline and they hold the majority and it's simply a matter of institutional procedural control and the majority will always extend that thing so everybody looks the other way. It probably couldn't be filibustered. So I don't know exactly what the mechanism is, but I guess I should say, although it's a little surprising, it shouldn't come as a total shock to us that there are safeguards built in that the majority can use to extend stupid deadlines. I mean, honestly, though, if you're going to rig it so that the two committees working on reconciliation only have to find $1 billion, only $1 billion, listen to me, with only $1 billion, but over 10 years, I mean, it's really not that significant to savings. And so they set the bar low so that it's easy to clear. Why not say, in the Senate, no later than, December 27th, 2017, the committees have to submit their recommendations. They don't meet the deadline anyway, so what's the difference? I don't know. But for whatever reason, they don't always put that deadline in there, I guess. I've not looked at every single budget bill that has reconciliation instructions, so I can't promise you. I'm sure they usually give some kind of general guideline about when they want this stuff to be done. But it seems to me, it's somehow incongruous that you would be so strict in interpreting the words that the Senate Budget Committee shall report to the Senate a reconciliation bill carrying out all such recommendations as meaning it can be one and only one, as opposed to two bills that each save $1 billion apiece or two bills that save $2 billion apiece. I don't understand why you would be so strict about it saying a reconciliation bill and not be strict about the January 27th thing. And by the way, why are they not strict about the word report? I'll bring this up again in hopes that someone will one day venture forth with a satisfactory answer. The reconciliation instructions say that finance shall report changes in laws of $1 billion over 10 years. They've reported nothing. HELP shall report, blah, blah, blah. They've reported nothing. The Budget Committee shall take those two reports and merge them into one report and report a reconciliation bill. They've reported nothing. All of this stuff was written by Mitch McConnell and his aides, and they used Senate Rule 14 to bring it to the floor, bypassing the committee process altogether. Read Rule 14. I could read Rule 14 to you, but it's a rule for bypassing the committees. If you've used a rule that bypasses committees, you can't have committee reports. they wouldn't exist. So they're already out of compliance with the reconciliation instructions. To me, if you ask me this question as the parliamentarian and you raise a point of order against consideration of whatever version of this bill comes to the floor, I say you're out of luck. You used Rule 14 as a starting point. You used Rule 14 to bring this reconciliation bill to the floor. The instructions say there needs to be a report. There's been no report. Is it waivable? I guess if you can waive that deadline, then you can waive the rest of the stuff too. But if you can just waive every part of the reconciliation instructions, what's the point of anything? Well, I guess we ask that question of ourselves in one form or another every day anyway. By the way, the instructions for the House of Representatives are similar, but it's a lot easier for them to waive their rules. And I think they actually complied with their rules, although I don't think that they met their deadline. I think everybody missed the deadline, but their Energy and Commerce Committee did report something, I think, and Ways and Means reported, and so did the Budget Committee. So I don't know what to tell you. For some reason, everybody believes a reconciliation bill is sacrosanct, and the rest of the instructions is garbage, are collectively garbage, I guess. Anyway, that's wrong, and we shouldn't do things that way. It's horrible. It drives me up the wall, but it probably drives everybody up the wall. So who cares? Because the newspapers just say, due to technical reasons, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, you tell me whether that was worth spending any time on. What else is in pocket? Oh, by the way, I had a great suggestion made to me over the weekend, the long weekend. It was already middle of the week by the time the suggestion came in, but because I was in weekend mode, I consider it to be the weekend. But every once in a while we consider how we might raise a little supporting cash around here. We discussed it a little bit yesterday, and lots of suggestions are made about things like, well, what about selling merchandise? What if there were Kagro in the Morning or Daily Coast Radio T-shirts and coffee mugs? Those are popular. Tote bags, right? Those are popular premiums or things that people might buy as, whatever, because they're fans of the show. And I've thought of it, and a couple of people have made some suggestions. Of course, one of the problems is, you got to design such things, and I'm not a design person. And we have, I'm sure, plenty of people who are listening who could design such things. But there was something I thought missing from the formula here. Like, would I buy if I were a fan of the T-shirt, would I buy a T-shirt that said Kagro in the Morning in some stylized form that was recognizable to other listeners as consistent with the branding of the show? Well, I might. But I might also say, yeah, okay, so it's a shirt with the name of a radio program I listen to. What is that doing for me? Okay, well, it's tribal identification. But I liked the suggestion made, Eve N as our last initial. You'll find her on Twitter as what looks like Even59, but it's Eve N. I'm always fascinated. always trying to figure out what's the proper way of reading people's handles. But then when they do double entendre, you never can tell. Anyway, Eve N59 suggested a T-shirt, and I like the way this was thinking, sort of just up the alley of, well, why not throw something in there that's sort of an insidery reference? What about a T-shirt that said something like, let's see what's in pocket today? Like, I don't know, on the back of the T-shirt where the thing on the front, Kagro in the Morning, let's see what's in pocket. Or what if it's even on the front? I've seen occasionally pocket T-shirts, and they make some reference in the graphic on the shirt to what's inside of a pocket, or have something peeking out of a pocket. I like the idea. Let's see what's in pocket. She says I'd buy one, and she's one of the cash-strapped listeners, sadly, as she points out, and I think we all are. But that struck me. We should brainstorm these things. We should specifically, you should brainstorm these things. All of you who are listening, not just Eve. And I don't know. We'll find some forum for sorting through the suggestions. But that's what I would be looking for. That would be something like, that's cool, that's funny, that strikes me as something that a listener to the show would say, oh, I know what that's in reference to. And it's that something extra that makes the t-shirt worth buying. Anyway, I don't know whether we're going to go forward with something like this or not, but I at least wanted to say, by the way, we have very clever listeners, and Eve N is one of them, and I like that idea, and maybe you do too. And if you'd each buy one of those things for $6 to $7 billion, we'd be in good shape and be able to take over the world. But even a couple of bucks would probably do. So this is all by way of allowing me to then say, okay, let's see what's in pocket. Get it? I'm looking to find out what I have put away in here. There's a couple of things. Two things that maybe we can squeeze in here before we make way for Joan with all the important stuff. One, you may have seen this over the weekend. The long weekend. If you did, it's possible you're not here because you've checked into a mental institution or you jumped out a window. Did you happen to see that NPR spent part of the weekend, the long weekend, tweeting the Declaration of Independence? And if you did or heard that story, then you probably know where I'm going, because the more interesting part of it is interesting, the Declaration of Independence. No doubt about it. What's more interesting, of course, is conservative Twitter's freak out over the tweeting of the Declaration of Independence. And I saw a couple of tweets summarizing some crazy stuff that they saw. Somebody collected it into a nice story here for Minnesota Public Radio. Bob Collins writing, NPR's tweets expose a thin grasp of American history. And that's a super kind way of putting it. Were those bomb-throwing leftists at NPR trying to undermine the nation and start a revolution? What could possibly explain this kind of talk on the 4th of July? And, of course, lots of screen grabs illustrating this thing, both on Twitter this morning and in this story, of NPR's tweets of literally just the text of the Declaration of Independence and Trump supporters assuming that the list of complaints that chiefly Thomas Jefferson drafted with respect to King George III and his mistreatment of American colonists, they believed that was liberal hippie jerks at NPR complaining about Donald Trump, and they were furious, and how dare you, and no wonder you're going to get defunded, you liberal commie bastards. And it's like, it's the Declaration of Independence. But the worst ones were the ones that went further than that. Like, what kind of trash are you? This is the dumbest stuff I've ever seen in my life. I can't believe you're tweeting it. You're so stupid. This is the worst writing, etc. It's the Declaration of Independence. And they don't recognize it. Now, very few people probably would. But I don't know. It seemed to me like, I mentioned it last night. My wife was saying they didn't recognize the weird stylistic 1700s lingo. And it's not overly, stylized, I guess, at least in parts of it. Some of it is pretty obvious, but I guess some of the tweets aren't. But for instance, NPR tweeting out this section. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, next tweet, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, and they really should have recognized the weird capitalization more than anything else. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. That would have been, of course, a full section of consecutive tweets from NPR. Bob Collins jumps back in here. It said, for more than an hour yesterday, NPR tweeted this un-American gibberish. Shut it down. Shut it all down. Fortunately, real Americans pushed back while defending the very values upon which this country was founded. I think most famously here, Darren Mills, a Make America Great kind of guy with a bow tie and everything, and the rest of his account seemed to be his eager anticipation of the shipment of his copy of Milo Yiannopoulos' book, to give you some idea of where he's coming from. It was the guy who tweeted, Darren Mills was, this is why you're going to get defunded. Let's see, we have a DG Davies tweeting as just Esrafel. I don't know. Should I even bother? Anyway, this guy saying, no, NPR is calling for NPR is calling for revolution. Interesting way to condone the violence while trying to sound, quote, patriotic. Your implications are clear. Again, they're talking about the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson was a bit of a revolutionary, no doubt about that. By the way, lots of controversy over the weekend, also. The long weekend, if you don't mind my saying so. Let's see, an ongoing restoration project at Monticello, his home outside of Charlottesville, Virginia, including the discovery, which is a weird thing to sort of use for the term. I mean, it's been there the whole time. The discovery of what they believe were Sally Hemings's quarters inside the main house, which, they were there, and it's, the history of that space is insulting in many ways. But the big controversy, of course, was over how the newspaper reports were referring to Hemings. We have historically, even that's problematic. Historically, she's been referred to in ridiculously over polite terms. Polite. And again, that's not the word either. Whitewashing. It's ducking the issue. Referring to her as Jefferson's mistress. There were reasons why people latched on to that. I guess defense mechanisms. But obviously, one, she's an enslaved person. Two, by the way, she was extraordinarily young when this. What do you want to call it? You can't even say. I'm having difficulty myself. I was going to say when this relationship. It's not a relationship. He owns her and he rapes her for the duration of his ownership of her. That's all there is to it. But it's difficult to speak of it in those terms because we have such great reverence for Thomas Jefferson, because he wrote this fantastic document that conservatives apparently hate. Another story deserves its own day of treatment, so I'll set it aside for that reason. I will flub it if I deal with it now. I'll flub it later, but at least we can spend more time dealing with the flubs as they occur, and they can get the time they deserve if we just push that story off. It's not, I'm trying not trying to ignore it. I'm saying it needs more time. You already know the story likely anyway. But by the way, that was an amazing thing. You know what I thought was really amazing about the history of the room? That I say it was weird that they discovered the room. The room's already there. They just didn't know what it was. What was this space being used for? And at some point when they are renovating Monticello for visitors back in the who knows when, 40s, 50s, they turn this space adjacent to, and how do you lose track of what room was what, by the way? I mean, you find Monticello perhaps at some point years and years after Thomas Jefferson dies in some state of disrepair. Are you really seriously not able to say, well, this was the master bedroom? You know, we can see that. And then there's this room, this chamber off of it. And I guess at that point, because people are so blind to what was really happening, maybe they can't figure out that was where he kept Sally Hemings. But so they don't figure this out. And at some point they decide, okay, visitors are coming. We have to renovate the building. We can't keep it in its original conditions. Visitors need restrooms. They have to be able to go to the bathroom while they're here. That wasn't in the original house, but that's a concession we can make. And they turned Sally Hemings's rooms into the men's room, which is, an insult on top of injury, of course, but not the point of the story. I find that whole chapter amazing. The point of our story was supposed to be about NPR tweeting about the Declaration of Independence, but, that's the way we do these stories here. We take tangents. I'll go back to this. Other conservative responses to NPR, once again, literally simply retyping the Declaration of Independence, weird capitalization and all. There's also Alma Sanchez, who says, glad you are being defunded. You have never been balanced on your show. Here's another one, NPR having tweeted the passage reading, he has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. That doesn't even make sense in the current context. But never mind. Terry wants to reply, horse chit. And he can do that because it's C-H-I-T and safe for radio, therefore. Now, Terry's not wrong. Donald Trump has not refused his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. But, of course, they're reacting, I think, to the common refrain that he may have obstructed the administration of justice. But the administration capitalized, of justice capitalized. That's clearly an 18th century reference. Maybe not as clear to everyone. Luke O'Neill replying to NPR saying, NPR, rethink this. Now, honestly, rethinking the Declaration of Independence, I don't think that's the message you want to send on the long weekend of July 4th. Another person called NPR's tweets trash, by the way. It was the Declaration of Independence. It seems out of sorts, I would think. I don't know. That was a very... I was not surprised by that. I was caught off guard, but I can't bring myself to use the word surprised by the fact that these idiot Trumpsters don't recognize the Declaration of Independence, and worse, think it would be trash if it were written today. I don't know. Make America great again, except for the parts that made America great originally. Get rid of those. Ugh. Let's see. Other interesting developments and that deserve some attention before we turn our attentions to, let's say, longer-term issues like healthcare. The Guardian reporting today, and AP News likewise, some additional discussion of expansions, the directions in which the Mueller investigations are expanding. I believe they're kind of going along the same lines here, but let's see, which one will I be able to cram in? Let me at least note what the Guardian has to say by way of headlines. I think you'll get the idea. Investigators explore if Russia colluded with pro-Trump sites, that is the websites, during the U.S. election. A specific look at whether or not Russian hackers, Russian bots, Russian government-connected hackers, Russian anybody, colluded with pro-Trump sites to disseminate the original fake news. I was just musing the other day to myself about how successful Trump has been in appropriating the fake news term. That was something that originally people were pointing at the Macedonian teenager news sites that said things like Hillary Clinton is deathly ill with pneumonia and could die at any minute, or Pizzagate, or things like that. And Trump just sort of rampaged through that and bigfooted the whole thing, and now fake news is his thing. And I regret that was so easy for him to steal away from us. That one is interesting. There's also lots of additional word on investigations into financial wrongdoing and other Russian crime operations. That more the focus of the AP's story, titled Mueller Probe. Come on, open up here. Mueller Probe could draw focus to Russian crime operations. And I thought I might read through this one quickly because it's relatively short, but also I think it coherently puts together the plot line that I have hoped I've coherently laid out over several days, several weeks in this show. But I think I may have made some leaps in the connections. I think most of you were able to follow it, but this sums it up nicely. Who's our writer here? Does it say? Eric Tucker for the AP. The U.S. government has long warned that Russian organized crime posed a threat to democratic institutions, including criminally linked oligarchs, that's a quote, who might collude with the Russian government, okay, to undermine business competition. Again, collusion, the collusion we're looking for, of course, is collusion between Russia and the Russian government and the Trump campaign. And the excuse that the Trump campaign very often throws up to excuse anything that looks like it might yield evidence of collusion is that either this person wasn't working for the Trump campaign or the person that they were talking to doesn't work for the Russian government. And there's lots of confusion intentionally generated by pro-Trump forces about that. That person is just a hacker. They live in Russia. They're not the Russian government. I've been trying to connect the dots wherever possible and to point out that it's always going to be difficult to tell whether or not someone is working at the behest of the Russian government because, A, the Russian government doesn't organize itself the way any other Western government does, and B, they are intentionally, the real problem with the Russian government and the Russia in general is that they're intentionally blurring the lines between government and extra-governmental activity, even though it's coordinated in the background. Now, that would be illegal in most countries, and it's illegal in that country too. But that's the problem, is their government is comprised largely of criminally linked oligarchs who, though it's illegal, go ahead and do it anyway because essentially I am the law in Russia and they can get away with these things. And I think this article puts it all together nicely. Those concerns, and again, the concerns, criminally linked oligarchs who might collude with the Russian government. There's a collusion problem between criminals and the Russian government, and a collusion problem between the Russian government and the criminals with which they collude, and our own gang of criminals here who were working in or around the Trump campaign. Those concerns, ever present, if not necessarily always top priorities, are front and center once more. An ongoing special counsel investigation is drawing attention to Russian efforts to meddle in democratic processes, again, everywhere, not just in the United States. The type of skullduggery that in the past has relied on hired hackers and outside criminals. It's not clear how much the investigation by former FBI Director Robert Mueller will center on the criminal underbelly of Moscow, but he's already picked some lawyers with experience fighting organized crime. And as the team looks for any financial entanglements of Trump associates and relationships with Russian officials, its focus could land again on the intertwining of Russia's criminal operatives and its intelligence services. That's huge. Can I say it again? The intertwining of Russia's criminal operatives and its intelligence services. If you were confused by how does a motorcycle gang participate in the invasion of Ukraine, this gives you some idea. If there can be intertwining of criminal operatives and intelligence services, I guess there can be anything. And by the way, this should come as no surprise to you. Well, the Russians, they're obviously more susceptible to this because XYZ. Think back to our own weird, still unexplained and unclarified history, pseudo-history, I don't know what to call it, of drug running in the CIA. Okay? I mean, I guess it can happen here. All right. Anyway, we'll just leave that hanging because that could, who knows, take decades to clear up. In recent years, though, we'll just go back to the AP for safety. The bond between Russian intelligence agencies and criminal networks has been especially alarming to American law enforcement officials, blending motives of espionage with more old-fashioned greed. By the way, I have to call a timeout again. If you're not willing to make the leap to CIA drug running in the 1980s and the introduction of huge amounts of cocaine and crack cocaine, it's a television show now at this point, I think it's generally accepted, but we hide it away and are ashamed of it, like how to deal with the memories of Sally Hemings and appropriately deal with her situation. It's another one we're too uncomfortable to deal with. How about something on a smaller scale? For instance, Manuel Noriega being on the CIA payroll for years, or Saddam Hussein for that matter, and people who we regard as international master criminals violating all sorts of principles of human rights, etc., who were on our intelligence services payroll. But for geopolitical reasons that might even have been genuine. You come up with excuses for your activity. But I was thinking more along the lines, more modern. I was thinking of Felix Sater. We know he's a gangster. He's a Russian mobster. And he's been protected for years by deals with the Justice Department, including President Obama's Justice Department, in exchange for giving up certain information. He was an inside tipster. I mean, it doesn't have to be that overarching and all-encompassing as CIA drug running. I mean, that tends to turn the roots of the country upside down, and at least our conceptualization of what we do or what this country is about stands it on its head. But if you can't get your head around that, just think about mobsters who turn state's evidence and then get protected, or are given new identities and entire new lifestyles under the protection of the FBI. Felix Sater didn't even bother going through all of that. He doesn't have to move away to San Diego like Steve Martin in My Blue Heaven. He gets to continue on with his lifestyle unmolested. Okay, back to the story. Like we were saying, this In Russia, what's been going on in Russia has been alarming to American law enforcement officials, blending motives of espionage with more old-fashioned greed. In March, for instance, 2 hired hackers were charged along with 2 officers of Russia's Federal Security Service in a cyber attack on Yahoo Incorporated in 2013. Didn't know about that one. It's too early to know how Russian criminal networks might fit into the election meddling investigation, but central to the probe are devastating breaches of Democratic email accounts, including those of the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. U.S. authorities have blamed those hacks on Russian intelligence services working to discredit Clinton and help Trump, but have said the overall effort involved third-party intermediaries and paid internet trolls. Could get hairy, right? Former law enforcement officials say Russian organized crime has been a concern for at least a couple of decades, though not necessarily the most pressing demand given finite resources and budget constraints. The threat is diffuse and complex, and Russia's historic lack of cooperation has complicated efforts to apprehend suspects, and their responsibility for combating the problem often falls across different divisions of the FBI and the Justice Department, depending on whether it's criminal or national security offenses, sometimes blurry boundary. It's not an easy thing to grasp or understand, but it's very dangerous to our country because they have so many different aspects, unlike traditional cartels, said Robert Anderson, a retired FBI executive assistant director who worked counterintelligence cases and oversaw the criminal and cyber branch. You have to know where to look, which makes it more complicated, he added, and you have to understand what you're looking for. Federal prosecutors continue to bring traditional organized crime cases, such as the one last month in New York, charging 33 members and associates of a Russian crime syndicate in a racketeering and extortion scheme that officials say involved cargo shipment thefts and efforts to defraud casinos. Who had casinos again? But there's a heightened awareness about more sophisticated cyber threats that commingle the interests of the government and of criminals. An organized criminal group matures in what they do, said retired FBI Assistant Director Ron Hosko. What they once did here through extortion, some of these groups are now doing through cyber attack vectors. Within the Justice Department, it's been apparent since the collapse of the Soviet Union that crime from that territory could affect national security in Europe and the U.S. Acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe was, years ago, a supervisory special agent of a task force created to deal with Eurasian organized crime. A 2001 report from the Justice Department's National Institute of Justice, a research arm, called America the land of opportunity for unloading criminal goods and laundering dirty money. It said crime groups in the region were establishing ties to drug trafficking networks and that criminally linked oligarchs might work with the government to undermine competition in gas, oil, and other strategic markets. This is not to mention the real estate laundering. 3 months later came the September 11th attacks, and the FBI, then under Mueller's leadership, and other agencies left no doubt that terrorism was the most important priority. Of course, that intermingles too. But okay. I recall talking to the racketeering guys after that and them saying, forget any focus now on organized crime, said James Fickenauer, an author of the report. Besides cyber threats, Justice Department officials in recent years have worried about the effect of unchecked international corruption, creating a kleptocracy initiative to recover money plundered by government leaders for their own purposes. We should let one loose on Trump, but okay. In 2014, then Attorney General Eric Holder pledged the Justice Department's commitment to recouping large sums believed to have been stolen during the regime of Viktor Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president chased from power that year. And this is an extraordinary sentence. That effort led to an FBI focus on Paul Manafort, the Trump campaign chairman who did political consulting work on behalf of Yanukovych's pro-Russia political party and who remains under scrutiny now. But those same foreign links have also made cases hard to prove in court. We very quickly exit from the amazing fact that Paul Manafort comes into this story not even with any ties, because of any ties to Donald Trump. It just, he lands there completely on his own and then gets absorbed into Trump world mysteriously for no particular reason. Of course, he's on hand because he lives in Trump Tower, but that's Neither here nor there. Trump Tower is full of criminally linked oligarchs. That's who buys in the Trump buildings. We know this. No one else apparently willing to say it, but whatever. Anyway, you should rent space and store the nuclear football there while you're at it. Go for it. Go ahead. All right. The story then shifts focus a little bit and just gives one example, for instance, of why some of these cases with foreign links are hard to prove in court. This is a weird procedural issue. In many instances, foreign criminal hackers or those sponsored by foreign governments, including China, Iran, and Russia, have remained out of reach of American authorities. In some cases, judges have chastised U.S. authorities for prosecutorial overreach in going after international targets. A San Francisco federal judge, San Francisco, grrr, you, for instance, in 2015, dismissed an indictment involving 2 Ukrainian businessmen who'd been accused of bribing an official at a United Nations agency responsible for creating standards of machine-readable international passports. Interesting, right? I mean, they might have been otherwise legitimate businessmen who actually had a product that did something good. They just wanted to get the contract with a UN agency, so they were accused of bribing a UN official responsible for possibly giving them what would otherwise be a perfectly reasonable contract. Anyway, the judge said he couldn't understand how the government could apply a foreign bribery law to conduct that had no direct connection to the U.S. I mean, that's an interesting issue, a jurisdictional issue, right? When you get right down to it, well, obviously you can't bribe a UN official on something like that. That's outrageous. And we caught you and we're bringing you to court to face criminal charges. And the judge says, well, they're not Americans. He didn't try to bribe an American official, and they weren't trying to get a contract administered by any American entity. What do we do with this guy? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's some jurisdictional. You would think that the UN would say, if you discover a crime about defrauding the United Nations, and you're a member nation, and you discover it happened within your territorial jurisdiction, go for it. You prosecute them. It's not up to us to do it. Where do we send them? To Hague? I don't know. I'm not so certain I would have agreed with the dismissal there, but I guess you can see what sort of weird things you run into. It's just, it's another way of approaching the weird gray areas that exist intentionally in all of this, right? Where, Paul Smith, Peter Smith, right? I don't want to call him Paul Smith. Isn't he a designer of some kind? Poor guy. Anyway, Peter Smith, he doesn't work for the campaign. You can't pin this on us. He did this independently. And besides which, he's talking, over on the Russian side, I'm talking to hackers that sort of kind of do have government connections, but over in Russia, they'll say, we can't prosecute this because it's not, you're looking for us to do something about it with our government, but these people aren't in our government, and they're operating out of Macedonia, and we have no territorial jurisdiction for that. Everybody has a little bit of distance they can put between themselves, but I think the relationships are obvious enough, but it takes a while to prove these things, to nail this stuff down. It's all very complicated, but I found the AP article, I thought, a good framework to work from if I hadn't successfully connected all the dots to this point. I'm hoping that this will provide a lot of the connective tissue for us, but I think we did a pretty good job with it. And I bring up the AP article. The other reason I bring it up is I think it confirms the connections that we've been able to discern in the writing from this point. It's not like connections that I made. I make them because the writers who we've read have very intentionally crafted their pieces, I think, to lead us to those conclusions without coming out and saying them, because their editors are reining them in. They're not things that are absolutely provable, that there are things that could get them, if not have them lead them to lose lawsuits, then it could certainly entangle them in lawsuits that will cost them a lot of time and effort and money to win. So they haven't come right out and said it, and I guess it's left up to us to do it. Anyway, Joan McCarter now ready to join us, and we can turn our attention elsewhere unless Joan is overly panicked by what's going on with Russian collusion, in which case I'm happy to continue on that path. Good morning, Joan. How you doing?
It's a low-level simmering panic.
Okay, that's fair. That's the right amount, I think, especially if you have job responsibilities elsewhere or a life.
While Trump care is happening, yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're sort of coming out of holiday mode here, and
Very slowly coming out of holiday mode.
they should make it a 2-day holiday. And one day they'll have to. Once we finally declare our independence from Russia, they can just add that on the 5th.
Yes, and it should always be the 5th because you have to be up so late listening to fireworks.
Yes, that's right. And even if you didn't want to go out to fireworks, lots of complaints from new parents and dog owners on Twitter yesterday. In my area, it was a lot more private fireworks going on because it was a cloudy day. No one wanted to go to the fields and sit in the wet grass, so they were just lighting them off in their driveways. And it must have been what Beirut used to sound like. Except we weren't scared.
Poor doggies.
So, yeah.
Poor doggies.
Yep, it was a rough day. A lot of such activity around you.
Yeah, lots of
Okay.
activity. Luckily, I have oblivious dogs.
That's good.
They don't
They're
care.
used to it, right?
Yeah.
And they love freedom. So
It's all about the freedom.
yes, and right. Some people hate us for our freedoms.
Yeah.
Dogs and babies, I think.
Did you know that taking Medicaid away from people is freedom?
I have heard that. Yeah, it's liberation, as a matter of
It's
fact. right?
liberation,
Somebody
yes.
did. Who is it that was making that argument about liberating us from Medicaid? And I found that was very. I was very glad that they used the term because it gave me the opportunity to say, you know what, you come out to meet us at the town halls and the 4th of July parades. You'll be greeted as liberators. I'm happy to accommodate you.
Good one.
So, we have some historical precedent to go with. I promise to greet you as liberators just the same way as we were greeted as liberators in Iraq, if you like.
If you like.
By which I mean staunch protest.
But throwing shoes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That would still be assault, mostly.
That would be assault. No, don't throw shoes
I'm
at any
donating
of your
these
senators.
shoes to charity.
They
You should
may
take them
deserve
to
it, but
children
don't do
who
it.
need them. Right. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm throwing those Tom's shoes at you. Right?
Maybe
Take these to
slippers.
needy children. Whack.
Soft shoes.
Yeah. Right. Kids need those too. Yeah, well, I'm glad they set themselves up for that one. And, the morning stories with regard to the continuing saga of Trump care are that somehow Ted Cruz is going to save the day. I find that hard to believe.
I find that hard to believe too. And I can't imagine. You and Greg talked about this a little bit, right? What his
Yes.
proposal is.
You know what? I don't think we really went into the proposal that much.
If an insurer offers an ACA compliant plan on the exchange, they can offer whatever junk plans they want to in addition.
Okay, yes. Greg did mention that. So that's his idea, is if you sell something good, you should also be able to sell something bad?
Right.
Huh.
And
That's great.
okay,
Yeah.
so there would be a good plan offered. What his bill wouldn't do is say, okay, you can't price people out of your good plan. Those people with pre-existing conditions will have to pay whatever you want to charge for this good plan.
Huh. All right. Well, that's sure. I mean,
So
it's just dumb on its face, but this is also dumb.
McConnell's asked the CBO to score the bill with and without that. So we'll know whether he asked them to do it on 2017 as opposed to 2016 numbers. I don't know. Because that's the other part of the CBO thing that's going on.
What would be your sense? I mean, you don't have the CBO's models at your disposal, but I'm trying to think of, do I think there's any reason why it would impact the budget if you said, well, although they're also estimating how many people would lose their insurance.
Right.
But,
and that's what I think
I guess that's what it is.
Republicans are getting at.
And I guess then you have a definitional issue of, well, what does it mean to lose one's insurance? I guess. I mean, if you have insurance now, and instead you opt for a plan that isn't really insurance, but that Ted Cruz says you're allowed to sell because for $1 million, the same person says, I'll also sell you a real insurance, and you buy crap insurance, are you insured?
Right. And I need to follow up on that. Before all of this started, the CBO put out a statement, and this is one of the things that's got Republicans pissed off at the CBO, saying they would not count crap plans as insurance.
Yeah. Well, okay. That's the answer.
I assume that they are still abiding by that decision. But that hasn't come up again in their last few opinions.
That'll be a tough one.
I'll see if I can figure that one out.
You know, the Republicans will be able, truthfully, to go on Sunday shows and say, these people have bought insurance, and the CBO is refusing to acknowledge that they've bought insurance, and that'll be hard to describe. But I mean, I guess it's sort of like going and saying, well, I have car insurance. Do I have health insurance? No. But if you say, you're insured, aren't you? Then I'm forced to say yes. That doesn't answer the question. I'm not magically covered with health insurance now. I'm magically covered with BS, which you just threw in my face.
If your deductible is $6,000 and you're making $24,000 a year,
right?
You don't really have health insurance.
No, you don't. And so you have a contract with somebody that says after you've paid all you could, more than you can afford, we might pay part of the rest later, but we also may hang up on you, by the way. But that's just not insurance. But they'll insist, look, a contract exists. You can't say they're not insured, but they're really not. That'll make for some amazing Sunday show stuff. But they'll just have to leave it there.
Right.
Sure.
And if the insurance company can say after 6 months of chemotherapy treatment, okay, we're done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that insurance?
Right. I guess right. Sure. We gave you some chemo. We didn't finish, but you got some. Well, it's better than nothing. No, it probably isn't. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, here's another simpler example, right? I guess if you can't figure this stuff out, our audience can figure it out. Whether the Sunday show audience can figure it out, I don't know. They're supposed to be smart people. I had a warranty for my refrigerator. What happened? I mean, I don't know if you remember that story. It took me a month to get this thing fixed. I bought an extended warranty on the thing from Lowe's. God bless them. They finally fixed the thing. But I bought a refrigerator. Then I didn't have a refrigerator. I had a warranty. I waved it at them. They said, yeah, you got it. I just didn't have a refrigerator. So, and that's just a refrigerator, not chemotherapy, not life and death. I was able to go out and get some other things, ice and a small refrigerator. You can't. I'll just buy another life, one without cancer.
Yeah.
Can't do it. So I don't know. I mean, you waive the contracts and say they bought insurance. You're lying when you say they're not insured. I'm saying they're not getting any treatment, but you're gonna have to drag those people onto the set to show them. But Republicans don't believe anything unless it happens in front of them or to them. So maybe that's it.
It only when it happens to them. I don't think even when it happens in front of them.
Oh, that's true.
If it's not somebody they are closely related to, it doesn't count.
Yeah, right. They're standing there saying there was no collusion. There's no evidence of collusion. It's happening in front of you. You're reading it every day. That's why it's working. Oh,
yeah.
What? Me? All right. So okay. Well, Cruz then thinks. What? How will this save? I mean, I understand the thing he wants to do. Is that something that Republican holdouts are interested in that will come back to it because you can also offer bad insurance?
I don't see how it really solves anything.
For real,
it's supposed to be a nod to the moderates. Yeah, we're keeping these protections. And a nod to the maniacs. Yeah, freedom, you don't have to buy it.
Okay.
I guess.
That's the best explanation.
If this works to buy off any of the moderates, it shows just how shallow they are.
Yeah. Certainly any of these three who were being celebrated in the articles about who was able to appear at their July 4th parades.
Right.
And who wasn't.
Talking about Murkowski, I heard Greg reading parts of that article before What Murkowski heard was not oppose this bill. What Murkowski says she heard from her constituents is do what you're doing now. Keep that. Keep negotiating.
Oh.
Keep looking out for our interests.
True. Yeah.
She didn't say they're opposed.
That's a good point. That's very true, and that's just the sort of trick that people end up using. And at the end, saying, "My constituents said I was supposed to protect their interests." At the time, that meant opposing the bill as written, but now it's written great because Ted Cruz fixed it. So
yeah,
that could be enough.
Well, it's she's telling Mitch McConnell she's still open for business. Keep bribing me. Keep giving me stuff for Alaska, and maybe I'll go with you.
Well, that's transactional Alaskan politics, and most places.
Absolutely.
Really.
And I can see,
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff might, and politics in some states very often driven more by what you can bring home than almost anything else. And some of the more remote states, that's a very big issue.
Yes.
Alaska, of course, being, the most remote.
And the most impacted by both Obamacare and Obamacare repeal.
Yeah.
It's really an outlier. So,
wow.
I'm not counting on Murkowski as being a solid opponent of this by any means. Collins, I think, Collins also heard what she wanted to hear. Stay strong, Susan. We appreciate you so much, Susan.
Yeah, I noticed the use of the first name was frequent in that.
Yeah.
Well,
so I think she's still gonna remain a solid no. I think she's got one of McConnell's golden tickets out. Heller apparently doesn't want to say anything if he doesn't have Brian Sandoval standing next to him backing him up.
Yeah.
Because he didn't have a whole lot to say after his appearance in the parade in Nevada. Wow. So we'll see.
Okay. Well, I would rather have more information from him, but I like the fact that he's so widely reported as being cowed by his governor who has got it right. So that's good news. I was just tangential to something we were just talking about a minute ago. I was just reminded about the Alaska politics of all this stuff. And Lisa Murkowski saying she's still open for business. And I was reminded of, I was going to say, who were the top ranking guys involved in that old thing they used to call the Corrupt Bastards Club up in Alaska? Do you remember that story?
I don't remember that.
Oh. They actually, there was a bunch of legislators. They ended up, a lot of them were prosecuted, but a bunch of state legislators who actually, walked around. They had hats, Make America Great hats. Instead of saying MAGA for short, for Make America Great, they had CBC on their hats. They went on vacation together and wearing CBC hats, and it was the Corrupt Bastards Club. They called themselves that. And there was a big FBI investigation into that, and it absolutely looped in another Murkowski, her dad, Frank, although she was on a short list of suspects too, and it never went anywhere. But the Murkowskis, let's say well-versed in that kind of transactional politics. I mean, so is everybody who's in politics.
If you make it into politics,
yes.
Succeed in politics in Alaska, you're going to be able to do that, yes.
And, almost anywhere. But I don't know. They
but
seem
Alaska
particularly susceptible to it. Yeah, I mean...
Yeah. Club that.
They just have a little line up here of a write-up of it that I just Googled up that has got, who's involved here. They have, pictures and profiles. Ted Stevens.
I was going to ask, is Ted Stevens in it?
Of course, right? Don Young, both Murkowskis. It's pretty comprehensive. So, this is the highest ranking guys.
In national Alaskan politicians.
Yeah. And then a bunch of ex-state reps. The ex-Speaker of the House, as a matter of fact, Pete Cott, 6 years in prison from this, by the way, in case you were wondering if it ever came to any fruition. Yes, for the little guys. Well, Speaker of the House. Ex-state rep Tom
Speaker
Anderson.
Of the State House.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
5 years in prison. A lobbyist that got 5 months in prison. Victor Coring, a state rep, 3.5 years in prison. Ted Stevens was actually convicted of 7 felonies in this situation, but got off on misconduct by prosecutors. So watch your step, Mr. Prosecutor. Plenty of others as well. Ex-state rep Beverly Masick pleading guilty to bribery in 2009, et cetera, et cetera. But the Murkowskis, it's a little more nebulous, and they ended up remaining suspects and never convicted or brought to trial. But, okay.
But then there's Don Young.
Yeah.
Was he in on it?
Yeah, on the suspects list here, what it says here,
Okay.
Campaign contribution, bribes, Jack Abramoff scandal, gets looped into this.
I mean, there's hardly a scandal that goes by that Young isn't somehow.
Yeah. He's been there a long time, and he's crazy, and no one has ever thrown him out of office. And so he just, I guess I'll just do whatever the hell I want forever. And
it's worked so far.
Mm-hmm. Lisa Murkowski is listed in this, by the way, for having funneled taxpayer money at some point to build a road to her vacation home in Kenai. So that's just standard. So come on.
That is standard. There must be some other people there who might drive on that road.
Surely you've done something important. Right?
Once or twice a month.
Leads to her house, but okay. Whatever. It's not a bridge to nowhere. It goes to my house.
Right.
And I can see Russia from it as well. She didn't even have to say that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. That was a diversion, but man,
it was a fun diversion. Well, on a morning where there just isn't a whole lot of new news.
Yes.
Other than Korea.
Yes. Right. Right. Destruction. Nuclear annihilation. That is true.
Yeah.
That did come up.
That's kind of news, and it kind of affects Alaska too, actually.
Yes, that's where they can get to, right?
They think perhaps, yes, that their missiles can reach Alaska, and boy, aren't we glad that we've got Donald Trump in the White House.
Yeah, he's dealing with it beautifully. He was at Trump National yesterday, which, I would think that would have caused problems for almost any other president, There's been an ICBM launch threatening the United States territory. Well, I've got a tea time. You deal
Watch
with it.
this drive.
Yeah, essentially. And the people he left in charge weren't particularly happy about it either. Nikki Haley apparently tweeting how annoyed she was to have to be in meetings on the 4th of July. And it's a big job and all, but, UN ambassador, that's going to fall to you. And they are going to do it on holidays. Maybe just to ruin your day, but you're going to have to deal. Or, you could not be UN ambassador. That's an option.
Yeah, you could give the job to somebody qualified. Who cares?
Right. I mean, I hate missing out on holidays too, but I don't get the big bucks for being an ambassador. So, okay. She was upset about that. And Rex Tillerson, I don't know what to make of him. I mean, he was upset too, but I don't know what to make of him.
Yeah. Back to what Craig is saying, do we actually have a Secretary of State?
Yeah.
Don't think so.
We've got there's no ambassador to South Korea, also missing on the list, and no anti-proliferation staff at the State Department. So those two things would be ordinarily important both to us and the South Koreans, with whom we're ostensibly allied.
Kind of handy to have right now.
And they did both they had some bilateral meetings not long ago at which the president yelled at the South Korean president about things, mostly trade, and I guess no discussion of the fact that you don't have an ambassador to our country, and that's kind of insulting. What are you going to do about it? But
by the way, just an aside here, we also don't have a FEMA director.
Right, and it's hurricane season.
Yeah.
Right. I understand there's a tropical storm out there looming now, and is it? Did I read correctly? It's a tropical storm. They named it Don.
Yes.
Would it be too much to say Donald? That really would have done it.
I think that might have been a little too on point for them.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's as clever as it can get. They must have looked around to see, did we have it Don yet? We've got to do this. But if you say Donald, they'll try and fire somebody.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Except there isn't anybody to fire.
Oh, that's true too, right. Somebody had to write that down somewhere. That guy is fired. Well, he quit, so you can't do it. Damn. But yeah, that's so you know, they're who knows? We could get away lucky, but still, the hurricane's not the only problem. We're not escaping wildfires as a problem, that's for sure. But I don't think Donald Trump knows that there's anything past, like, I don't know what, St. Louis. He doesn't go west often.
I don't even know that he spent any time in California, really.
Yeah, I don't think he really. I mean, I suppose he's clearly been there at some point, but yeah, he doesn't travel there much. Even his rallies don't go west, and I know he's got a lot of Western supporters. Well, I mean, I hope they're abandoning him, but I don't think they are.
I would hope so. Fire season might help in that. And fire season has indeed started out here. Started last month, which is very early.
Oh.
But we had an extremely wet spring, so lots and lots of fuel load, lots of cheatgrass, which is the only purpose of which I can find for cheatgrass is that it burns easy. So the typical thing, we had very wet spring, we've got lots of fuel, and the storms that we've been getting are lots of thunder and lightning, very little rain, so lots of lightning sparked fires already.
Yeah.
So yeah, when we burn up this year and there's no money to stop it, maybe people will start to turn on Trump.
Well, some people, a little at a time. Or, you know, when their houses burn
up.
Yeah, I guess that's a possibility. I hope somebody's on top of it when their houses burn down. They're removed from the voter rolls. I hope they're not going to let that slack. You make sure that's taken care of. That's of course another of the stories in the news. I'm sure you've taken note of that. How many states now have said that they will not be complying in one way or another? I think I saw 44.
I saw yesterday that it might be as high as 44.
Yeah. Including.
But I'm not sure. The more solid number I've seen is 41.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I did see a hint at 44, but I didn't get any inkling of what the other states were. And I'm not certain how to define whether or not you're insured. I'm not sure if I understand the definition of non-compliance.
Right.
Is Kansas non-compliant because Chris Kobach told himself he wasn't going to send the Social Security numbers?
You would think Secretary of State of Kansas, Chris Kobach, would check into the laws of the state of Kansas.
Well, he is at a disadvantage.
To see what he could do.
Right. He's handicapped in figuring out what the law says because he went, at some point, he diverted in his career and he went to Harvard Law School, and that's not going to equip you for anything.
Snob.
So there's no chance he would be able to figure out what the applicable law was. I'm curious, though, whether he wrote to himself or whether
I think it's more of a matter he doesn't care.
Oh, well, that may be true. But I'd just like, that's what I want to do. Can we use could Daily Kos ever do FOIA requests? I was wondering
we could do a FOIA request.
I'd love to know if there's a letter in the archives of the Presidential Commission on Election Integrity somewhere addressed to and signed by Chris Kobach saying, Dear Vice Commissioner Kobach. Yeah, right. I am not sending those things because law, which I just found out about, signed me. It reminds me of the Woody Allen scene in Bananas where he's cross-examining himself in a courtroom. He also went to Harvard Law School. That is a lie. That's fake news, by the way. Okay, so...
My question is, would it be even scarier if these people were competent?
Yes. I think.
It's...
There's a certain comedy to their being incompetent, but I assume it's a judgment call. What sorts of dangers are we being exposed to? They can competently make terrible policy implementations, or we can remain vulnerable to God only knows what because we're obviously incompetent to all sorts of outside actors who can take advantage of it. Who knows what various international actors do, criminal actors in our own country, or just otherwise innocent actors in our country who have things screwed up for them by incompetence. I don't know. It's a tough call.
It's a very tough call.
It comes up from time to time when people say, well, yeah, but if you impeach Trump, you get Pence. And we know he's an ideologue and a terrible guy, and he actually might know how to work the levers of government. But it's a different kind of terrible.
Yeah.
So it's a
one that's
call.
little less likely to get us annihilated by nuclear weapons.
Yeah. And if you'd have a hard time getting past nuclear annihilation, then it's hard to weigh that against even, terrible healthcare outcomes and say, but they're both disastrous. One perhaps is over faster than the other, but I don't know. I couldn't fault you for saying you were on one side or the other there.
No.
All right. I'm taking a look around to see what else might be on your
Not
radar,
a lot else happening out there because,
because they're out hiding.
Nuclear annihilation and 22 million people losing health insurance is old news.
Right. Forget that. Surely something got tweeted that, I feel bad about perpetuating that too, but you gotta stay on top of these things.
See today that House Republicans are thinking about just helping stuff out even more by considering repealing Obamacare's insurance mandate.
That wasn't already in their plans?
Well, apparently they are thinking that if the Senate is this screwed up, at least we'll do this.
Oh.
I don't know. It's mischief as near as I can tell. We've already got Trump's administration probably not actually enforcing it. That was never really a clear directive from him in that first executive order. But, as far as we can tell, they're not enforcing the mandate at all. But here's Paul Ryan and team deciding, okay, let's just inject this little bit of insanity into the debate because it's not crazy enough.
Okay. Well, that's helpful of them. I wonder how quickly that would move I guess we'll get some sense of how serious they are, depending on what moves they make to move this forward. I mean, it's a difficult time. The shadow of the Senate activity has got to be pretty big. I guess you could move it beneath that shadow, but it still has to pass the Senate. And
it doesn't seem like a particularly helpful thing.
No, okay.
That it's the House of Representatives. When have they been helpful in recent years?
Not much.
Yeah.
That's true. Okay, well, that's worth noting just in case they bring that forward at some point and everybody says, while you were being distracted by nuclear annihilation, the House of Representatives brought this bill and nobody noticed. And now we can say, aha, Joan told us on Kagro in the morning. So at least we have that. And sometimes it's about laying down markers for the record later on.
Sometimes it is. It's not very satisfying in most circumstances to be able to say, I told you so.
Right, yes. You hope to not
this
be
really,
able to.
really horrible stuff.
Right. Well, we'll consider it an early warning, and we'll say that way our goal will not be to sit around and say, I put this in the book so I can tell you I told you so, but rather to raise the flags when necessary and say, okay, so now we need to be calling members of Congress again. We should basically be calling and complaining to them every day about something. And one day this one will come up too.
Every day they need to be hearing from everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Well, other than that, it'll be a relatively quiet week because everybody left Washington to go hide in their or run away and do other things.
Or show up if they are showing up. Show up. Ted Cruz went to an invitation-only public meeting held by Concerned Veterans of America, a Koch group.
An invitation-only public meeting by a Koch group
there
with
were
veterans.
Protesters outside of it. It was announced that he was going to be there, so there would actually be protesters around it. Oh. Mitch McConnell did something similar.
Okay.
And Murkowski, Collins, and Heller all decided to go to the places where there aren't so many people
in
the States.
but they got encouraged nonetheless. I also, speaking of protests, I saw that Donald Trump has gone from demanding a ride in the Queen's golden carriage when he visits England to, can you smuggle me in the middle of the night on my way back from G20 for something. I don't know what he wants to even go there for, but he wants to come in a way that would they would give the English only the British 24 hours notice or less, and he wants to like fly in, do something. I don't know what he thinks he's going to get done, and then get back out because he's afraid of protesters.
He probably thinks he can go get that terminally ill baby out of the hospital and bring it to the United States.
That's it.
And become a hero.
I'm confused about that story, and
I'm extremely confused by that story when he's here willing to take health insurance away from 22 million people, including mothers of newborns.
Right. Yeah.
And
those are abstract.
But this one in Great Britain, sure, because I don't know why.
It may be nothing more for somebody like Donald Trump than, well, that one is on television.
I think that's probably it.
22 million of you can get on television.
To put all of the 22 million people who could lose their health insurance on television, maybe we could have a game show with them.
And win your health care. That's a great idea. It might be where we end up. I don't know. I can't explain what he does anymore. Although I've settled on don't try to make a grand strategy out of it. It's dumb. And if he saw it on TV, that's what the solution is. It wasn't timed for any reason. And most often they can say very definitively, yes, there was a segment on Fox within 15 minutes of that tweet. That's why he said it.
Yeah.
And it's usually
We're
true.
going to have to start, I don't know, ads on Fox and Friends, the fake ads like they used to do in the Bush administration.
Right. Yeah, I'm surprised he hasn't appropriated $1 billion for the shark steam cleaners or something.
Yeah.
We gotta have the cleanest sharks in this country.
Fake news report ads.
Yeah. Why not?
On Fox and Friends.
Or
maybe that would work.
Yeah. One of those science fiction-y things where we somehow break into the signal into the White House and put on our own news. But, yeah, I did see somebody tweeting that he's like a reverse TV guide. You know, he tells you what was just on Fox for one channel. Well, it's pretty awful, but, par for the course. So, okay.
It's pretty awful, but we'll get through it together.
Yeah. Well, that's the only way we can do it. And, I hope you'll join us then, next week. There'll be some more activity. I guess
there will be much more activity.
We'll
maybe have more of a handle on this whole thing.
Okay, and hopefully we'll see some light at the end of the tunnel and maybe a path to the defeat of the Senate bill. Cross our fingers and hope for it.
Fight senators.
Yeah, keep doing it, even though they're hiding from you. Call the offices. They can't hide. They're open today. Call them and leave a message. They count those things up. Thanks, Joan.
You're welcome.
We'll be back with you next week. Okay, take care. Joan McCarter, our senior political writer, back to do all the senior political writing that goes on at Daily Kos. Plenty more that we didn't get to that no doubt the guys on the after show will wrap up for us. By the way, I'll just put on the record, yes, I have seen the story of the lawsuit filed with respect to the Georgia 6th Congressional District special election. Not sure what to make of it. I'll just put this on the record in respect to some of the readings we've done about the manipulation of Google searches before. The top hits on this story, if you go to find it in Google News, are from the Washington Examiner, super ultra-conservative, almost bordering on fake news newspaper, Newsmax, etc. There are a few local sources on it and some reputable sources too, but the top hits on it are from the troll papers, and I think that might tell you something. We'll see if we can look into it and find out more about it tomorrow if the guys on the after show don't pick that one up first. Let's see what we got here. We got pro-Trump websites being investigated for collusion with Russia. We mentioned that one. UN survey finding cybersecurity grabs everywhere except in Singapore, interestingly enough, like World War Z when North Korea escaped things. We'll check into that. Do stay tuned as Wink and Justice pick up those stories and more after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, looks like things have gone off the rails here. A story I didn't mention for them. Look at this. In further proof of the power and magic of the free market, a GOP digital consulting firm hired by Trump and Pence is exploring the exploiting the DNC murder of staffer Seth Rich to sell a wrinkle cream. Can't believe it? Stay tuned.